Thank you for viewing this YouTube archive of a Conscious Consumer Network broadcast. Please feel free to share it far and wide. Check out our weekly broadcast guide for weekly updates on scheduled broadcasts. Help keep us on the air by contributing to our network support fund. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or get in touch via email. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
Hi there, welcome to another live broadcast of Pateo television, brought to you via Conscious Consumer Network.tv. My name is Johan Oldenkamp. I'm the host of this television talk show. The guest of this episode is sitting here right beside me. That means in the virtual room. And his name is Mark Devlin. Mark, welcome into the show.
Hey, Johan. Good to be here, brother. Yeah,
very good that you're here. We will start doing a presentation later on, but maybe you can say just a few words about yourself and especially your DJ history.
Okay, well, I've been a radio and club DJ for the last 25 years. And during that time, I've been fortunate enough to play in about 40 different countries around the world. And I've done various shows. I've written for various different magazines. I'm a journalist as well. And about 5 years ago, I had what I refer to as a conscious awakening, where I came to an understanding about some great truths concerning the true nature of reality, what this place is, what we're doing here, the laws that govern human behavior, and what's being done to humanity by a small group of psychotic individuals that seem to think they're better than everyone else and have been holding humanity in enslavement for many thousands of years. So that kind of shattered my world, as you might imagine, and it set me off on a slightly different path to what I'd been doing previously. So I started looking into how all of what I've just mentioned actually tied in to the corporate mainstream music industry of which I was a part. And I came to understand how this particular industry was being used for some very nefarious mind controlling and social engineering purposes. And so for the past 5 years, I've been researching the various methods by which this is done and how it's being used against us. And I'm now in the process of putting out a book which will be out early in the new year, entitled Musical Truth. And I now host a whole bunch of podcasts. One is called Good Vibrations. The other one is called The Sound of Freedom. And I do public talks presenting all this information that I've come to discover and understand. So it's a little bit different to what I was doing previously, but it seems this is where I need to be in life. And it seems to be a reflection of where we're at in these times. So interesting stuff indeed. That's why I'm here tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're going to talk about that in depth, of course, in this presentation. But what I'll do now is I'll start sharing my screen, and then we have a where is it? My presentation thing. Because yeah, actually you were supposed to be on the show 2 weeks ago, but then you were not able to make it. So I showed 2 presentations of you, and I also give an introduction to your work. So today this is actually part 2 of musical manipulation. And the date of today is, of course, November 26th, 2015. And every Thursday at this time slot, which is 8 p.m. Central European time or 7 p.m. UK time, Pateo TV is broadcast live via CCN. Here you find the URL of CCN, Conscious Consumer Network.tv, and there's 24/7 television. And if I'm correct, you were part of the People's Voice, Mark, 2 years ago, if I'm correct. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, I was. The People's Voice launched almost exactly 2 years ago, I think, November 2013.
Hmm.
And the minute I heard about that project being launched, I immediately wanted to be a part of it because it felt like it was a natural home for me to do what I was doing at the time with my conscious music podcasts. And this was me putting together a whole load of music that stood as the absolute antithesis of the nasty, controlling, toxic corporate stuff that was just getting more degraded by the month. And so I heard about the launch of the People's Voice from David Icke's website, and I knew him at the time. So I reached out to him and said that I would like to be a part of it. And I outlined the sort of show that I would like to do. And straight away, I was snapped up to be a part of that whole network. So I was very happy to have been brought on board. But almost from the start, as people may be aware, there were some big problems with those broadcasts. There was all kinds of issues going on behind the scenes in terms of the staff and in terms of the personnel that had been brought in to do the day-to-day running. And there were problems and issues with the broadcasts in terms of the feed constantly going down and in terms of programs not going out the way they should have done. And there were allegations of the YouTube channel having been hacked and all the videos taken down. And there were also allegations of the live broadcast feed capability having been hacked into. So all kinds of strange stuff was going on, and organizationally, the whole project was just a disaster. And it really felt as if it had been infiltrated by certain parties who had been charged with just bringing it down and not allowing it to be a success. It's very difficult to get a full grasp on how that happened and on who the individual parties may have been, but it was just a mess and a shambles from the start. And there was also the financial element as well, in that there was a whole load of money that was donated by the general public to that project to keep it afloat. And there seems to be very little accountability in terms of where that money went. And the People's Voice only lasted for a few months, and it finally went down in the summer of 2014. And it was announced that the company had gone into liquidation. But it went away, leaving way more questions than answers, such as what was it all about? You know, who was it that came in? Which parties was it that were responsible for it just not being the success that it should have been? And also, what happened to all the money? You know, I should point out that I'm not by any means pointing the finger at David Icke personally, because, you know, he was the figurehead of the project when it first launched. But by the time it finished, he was no longer a director of it. There was only one director left in place. I'm not really in a position to point the finger at any specific individuals, but it's just a shame that that project didn't succeed the way so many of us hoped it would. So by about April of 2014, I realized that it wasn't going in the direction that it should have been. And I took the decision to step away from it and remove my show, The Sound of Freedom. And ever since, I've been putting that out myself as a free podcast. So I upload it to my SoundCloud channel. I also share it on Mixcloud and Podomatic, and you can get it via iTunes. And I've been doing it independently every fortnight, and I've kept it going. It's music that speaks to us in these times. It's artists articulating many of the things that are on people's minds. And it's just a reminder that real, meaningful, conscious music is being made, and you don't have to opt for all this nasty corporate toxic stuff that they're trying to shove down our throats. Alternatives are available.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think the money involved in the People's Voice was quite a bit. I mentioned in my newsletter $2 million USA. So that's quite a lot of money.
Sure.
And it's sure a pity that it didn't work out, but fortunately there is an alternative now. CCN. This is my website, pateo.nl. In 10 different languages, there's information about my work, and if you're interested in television, you just click on here. This is the URL, and there you find Pateo television button. And on this website, holyscience.org, there you see at the top, if you go there now, a reference to the previous episode about musical manipulation, where I showed both videos of Mark. And there you also find the links to both the radio shows Mark is doing at this moment. So if you go to holyscience.org, you can easily find the links and click on them and find what Mark was just explaining. These were the first 7 episodes of Pateo TV. They were presentations by me alone. You can find them on YouTube, all of them. I advise you to watch them in the order they were broadcast because they build on each other. And I did 6 more, also kind of unity, but these ones, yeah, you can also watch in different orders. But there's also a kind of unity, and of course they're all available on YouTube as well. And then I started with interviewing. The first interview was with Kelvin Abram about tetraionics, and then actually 2 weeks ago I was supposed to interview you, Mark, but you were not around, so I did instead 2 of your presentations, the one in New Horizons in the United Kingdom of June this year, and you were also at the Free Your Mind conference number 3 in April in Philadelphia, if I'm correct, in the USA.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, and I think those were brilliant presentations of you. So we already sent that out to the audience of CCN, and you can also watch them on YouTube part of this one. So that was that episode, and we're now at this episode of Musical Manipulation live with the man himself, with you. And I met you in Denmark at the Open Mind Conference 2015, where we both gave a presentation, and I was really impressed with what you presented there. Here you see the panel discussion at the end, and yeah, we sit here next to each other on the same couch with a Danish woman in between.
I think I only answered one.
Yeah, you didn't get much questions. Yeah, most were addressed to. Yeah, Ola took a lot of answers as well. And in the beginning, I was a bit harsh about a question that came about the flat Earth theory, which still gives me comments, but I think it was a good answer. Anyway, this is you presenting there, and yeah, what we're gonna do now is I will give the floor to you, Mark, and you can share any information you want with the audience of this live broadcast in order to show how the music industry actually became an instrument of mind control and as you said, social engineering. So I'll stop sharing my screen now and give you the opportunity to start sharing yours.
Okay, let me see if this works. What have we got?
Yeah, it might take a little bit of time. Yeah, it's already going.
Can we see that?
It's coming.
Okay. Well, first off, I should say that people should excuse the voice because I'm a bit congested at the moment. My immune system has taken a bit of a battering. I've been doing too much working and not enough sleeping. So I'm a bit sort of under the weather at the moment and my voice is a bit croaky. So excuse me if I need to cough or sniff or whatever, but I'm sure we'll make the best of it. Some of the information that I present today might be recapping on what people would have seen 2 weeks ago with the 2 presentations that you showed, but I'm going to try and build on that and add a few bits and keep it topical in terms of stuff that's going on right now. So hopefully there'll be some new information in there as well. So I'm trying to share this screen at the moment. Can we see it? Or are you still seeing it?
Yeah, we see do no harm, but take no shit.
Okay, you can see that. Good.
Yeah, we can see it.
What I want to talk about is what people might think are 2 wildly differing subject areas. First off, it's a combination of the concepts of free will consciousness, consenting, and natural law. And I'm going to be talking about how that ties in with the mind control manipulations of the mainstream music industry. As I say, first off, people might think, what the hell have those subject areas got in common? What kind of connection could there be between them? It's something I've been looking into very fully for the last year or so. And I do want to attempt to show how these are intrinsically linked. And this was a path that I wasn't really expecting to go down, because when I first started writing the book, which I hope to bring out hopefully January, it might take until February. But when I first started researching it, I imagined that it would be a kind of nuts and bolts expose of the machinations of the entertainment industry and the various tactics that are used. So I imagined it would be laying out how trauma-based mind control works on artists, showing how occult symbolism is employed in videos and stage shows and record sleeves and things like that, showing how the corporate music industry is linked to the transhumanism agenda, showing how backmasking, backwards subliminal messages are employed in sound recordings and what the idea is behind them and all that sort of stuff. And certainly that is going to be in the book. But it started taking me down a different path as I delved further into the research. And it started veering me towards the concept of natural law and free will and consenting. And I started to gain a very deep understanding of how these dynamics work and how they're inherent in the universe. And so the first picture I've put up here, Do No Harm But Take No Shit, is a very simplified and easy to remember summing up of the central tenets of natural law. Maybe the language is not something that you might want to use with your kids, but for grown folks, it's a very easy way of remembering it. And it's an oversimplification of what I came to understand were the two central tenets of natural law. By natural law, what I mean is moral codes or guidelines to human behavior, which were set into place by the creative force behind the universe. So, of course, many people would call that creative force God. Others would put a name on it. They might choose Allah, Jehovah, Buddha, whatever. It doesn't really matter what name you put on it. The concept is always the same in terms of this divine creative force behind the universe, behind all of creation. And so I came to understand that these laws were put into place by that force. And these laws go under many different names. I choose to call it natural law, but many people refer to it as universal law, karmic law, cosmic law. It's been called the law of cause and effect, consequentialism. Again, it doesn't matter what label you put on it, the concept is always the same. These are eternal, unmovable laws that were set into place and by which we are intended to live our lives and guide our thoughts, actions, and behaviors if we choose. And the choose part is very important because that's where free will consciousness comes in. And I came to understand that as humans, we are unique among sentient beings in having been gifted with the capacity for free will, to make our own decisions. So we can choose to align our thoughts, actions, and behaviors with these laws of morality, natural law, and we can reap karmic consequences as a result of those decisions that we make, or we can choose to go against them and go our own way and live in defiance of these eternal laws, and we can reap a different set of consequences which will be dished out to us. And this works both on an individual basis, a microcosmic basis, and on a collective macrocosmic basis. So an individual can choose whether to align their life and their behaviors with these laws, and a collective, a human society on a much larger basis can choose whether they as a group are going to align their behaviors in this way, and the consequences get dished out accordingly, in both circumstances. So we have the non-aggression principle, which is the do no harm bit, which is an expression of the sacred feminine principle, which is inherent in nature. And then the sacred masculine equivalent of that is the self-defense principle, which is where the take no shit bit comes in. And okay, just to expand the do no harm part of it a bit, it's a very simple and very easy to understand golden rule, which really should be applied to the lives of everyone on the planet, because everyone's experience would improve dramatically as a result if people would just observe this golden rule. And it can be expressed as, do not treat others in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself. It's so simple, an infant can understand it, and it really should be taught in schools, I feel. And it speaks volumes, the fact that it's not. But a child could definitely understand the simplicity of that statement. Do not treat others in a way you would not wish to be treated yourself, because everybody knows how they don't want to be treated. If people would only consider that in terms of their behaviors and how they impact on other people, and if they realize that a behavior they're about to undertake is going to break that golden rule and is going to impinge on somebody's rights, then it would guide their decision in whether to take it or not. And we have so many problems in the world today, and we have chaos and violence and mayhem purely because people do not understand or choose to follow that most simple of golden rules. And then the self-defense principle bit comes in, where if you are living your life in accordance with that principle and you're not harming others in your behaviors, if somebody is doing a behavior to you which takes away your rights and which impinges on your personal freedoms, then you have the right to do whatever is necessary to defend yourself, which is where, you know, this self-defense principle comes in. Anyway, yeah.
No, I was just saying it's good to mention the name of Mark Pateo here, but that's what you're already doing. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I've used a couple of quotes from Mark Pateo, and I do quote him in my public talks, purely because of all the different speakers that I've heard talking about this subject. This guy puts it in such an unambiguous, easily digestible, simple to understand way that there's really no excuse for not understanding how this dynamic works. You know, he's very eloquent, very articulate, and he's a great teacher. And most of what I've learned about these subject areas has come from his work. So the reason I do quote him so much is because I can't better what he says. And so if he's saying it so well, let's repeat what he has to say to really get the message across. You know, I get it garbled and jumbled, and, you know, I can't express it as well as Mark Pateo does. So there's a couple of quotes that I use to get the message across. And there's this one: the bottom line is, if you wouldn't want a person doing a certain behavior to you, don't do it to another person. The end. And people can't get that simple message. That's the golden rule in the apophatic sense. You see, you often get this golden rule expressed in the form of do no harm, you know, do not treat others in a harmful way, which is the same idea in principle. But what he's getting across here is that it's far more impactful, and it removes any ambiguity when you state it in the negative apophatic sense. Do not do to others what you do not want done to you, because everybody knows how they don't want to be treated. Exactly. And then just to expand on that, the solution is so simple, it always has been: don't treat others the way you yourself wouldn't want to be treated. You don't want to be harmed, defrauded, stolen from, raped, have your rights taken away? Don't do that to other people. It's so simple, it's almost stupid. It is. And yet people still don't seem to be able to get it. And I would suggest that this has been the root cause of all the problems that humanity has faced through the eons and through the ages, because there just quite simply has not been this mass collective understanding of how this dynamic works. And I always enforce the point, as does Pateo, that it doesn't matter whether any one individual believes that this is the case, or likes it, or chooses to apply it to their own lives. It goes on being the truth anyway. That's what the truth is. It is what it is. It's eternal, it's unchanging, and we are governed by it, whether we like it or not, or accept it or not, or, you know, choose to go with it or not.
Exactly. So, what I also like to add, Mark, sorry to interrupt you, is that he also spoke at the Free Your Mind Conference 3, where you spoke to in last year, this year, sorry. And he said that he spoke very clearly and harshly, actually, about order followers. And the principle "do no harm" is also applicant to you if somebody tells you to do it. So if you are doing harm and you take the lame excuse that you are told to do so, it doesn't really matter. You still violate that universal principle, and the consequences are for you. So I think we should stop following orders if they are telling us, including us, to do harm to other people. So just wanted to add this to your talk, Mark.
Well, exactly. It's a good point. The karmic consequence for an action which is put into physical manifestation comes down upon the individual that made the free will choice to actually perform that action. So if you have a general in the military that orders a soldier to drone bomb a village in Syria, which ends up killing women and children, of course, the general that gave the order bears some culpability for what happened, because he instructed the other individual to actually carry this out. But it was the individual operating the drone bomb that actually caused the death, that caused this mayhem and this destruction. And so therefore the karmic consequence of that action, that the bulk of it is going to come down on the individual that actually brought it into manifestation. Because if the drone bomb operator had exercised his own conscience and applied his own free will to the situation and had applied some morality to it and realized that he didn't want to be responsible for the deaths of innocent people and had refused to carry out the order, then the action would not have taken place. I was listening to Pateo on a radio broadcast today, actually, where he simplified it even further. And he was saying to the interviewer that if you were to say to me that I should go out into the street right now and the first person that I see walking down the street, just sock them a cracking punch to their face, you know, who was at fault there? Was it the guy that said, hey, go out in the street and punch somebody? Or was it the person that actually cracked that punch that caused all the mayhem that's going to ensue as a result? You know, very simply, it's very easy to see that it was the individual that took that order or that suggestion and thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that. Whereas with free will, this gift of free will that we have the opportunity to make a choice either way based in morality. And a moral individual aligning themselves with the concepts of natural law would understand that it's not a great idea and it's taken away somebody's rights and you have no right to do that. And it doesn't matter if somebody told you to do it. The onus is on you to make the conscious decision as to whether it's a moral and therefore a right thing to do or not. So, you know, quite rightly, the karmic consequence rains down upon the individual that actually caused that thing to come into physical manifestation. I really hope that all this stuff becomes clear in terms of how it all ties together as we move on, because it can seem pretty disparate to start with, but I think all the threads will tie together as we go on. So I want to move on now to a few phenomena which occur in the entertainment industry. And these are some of the sort of nuts and bolts things that are going into the book and which I thought the book was initially going to consist of before it kind of changed its direction and it changed its tone somewhat. So I've spent a lot of time talking about the phenomenon of predictive programming. And I'm sure many people are familiar with what it is, but I've just put together this brief description of it, an encapsulation of what it includes, just to make it real simple. Predictive programming is the practice of encoding visual clues and symbols into works of popular culture aimed at large audiences which depict a real-world event, should be in there, yet to happen or currently happening. In recognition of the powerful influence of the subconscious mind on an individual's psyche, images are subtly conveyed in encoded form which foreshadow events which are known to be coming. So let's try and get into some examples of this. This is a very early example of predictive programming at play, and it concerns a novel called Futility, which came out in 1898, the creation of a guy called Morgan Robertson, and it appeared very strangely and eerily to depict the events concerning the Titanic, which were to occur 14 years later in 1912. And in this story, it detailed the sinking of a supposedly unsinkable ship. It was the largest vessel afloat at sea at the time. It was called the Titan. Go figure. What were the chances? It collided with an iceberg during the month of April, resulting in a high loss of life because the ship carried too few lifeboats. And of course, we all know that the official story of the Titanic included all of those elements. And how can it be that 14 years earlier, so many aspects of it were encoded into this novel? It's only possible if the individuals behind these works of apparent fiction, whether it's books or movies or TV shows or music videos, as we'll come to see, are privy to inside knowledge as to what is yet to happen in major world events. And that, of course, would suggest complicity with those parties that actually bring these events around. It's either that or it's a very heavy level of coincidence each and every time. And if people are going to try and put all these examples I'm going to show down to coincidence and pure chance and just one of those things, then we're talking about odds of many, many billions and probably trillions to one. So good luck with that way of looking at life. If that's the way you go about things. They call us conspiracy theorists, but more hilarious than conspiracy theorists are coincidence theorists that really will put these things down to, oh, it's just the way it goes. It's just one of those things. It's absolute denial of the fact that there's a real dynamic at work here, and something that we do need to understand.
Yeah, the beauty is last week it was in Dutch, unfortunately, but we talked in depth about the whole Titanic issue event. And all the evidence was so clearly that it was an inside job. We're not going to talk about that now. But that means that it was very good possible that all the information was available 14 years ago and was maybe deliberately put in a book. So I completely subscribe to what you're suggesting, Mark. So please continue.
Sure. Yeah. And there's so much to get into with that story of the Titanic, which you may well have done in that show. I didn't see it, but there was the element of these three key individuals on board that were the main objectors to the introduction of the Federal Reserve Act, which was due to be passed at the time. And they just happened to be among the victims on that particular ship. And then, of course, there's the suggestion that the ship which sank wasn't actually the Titanic, but White Star Line, owned by a certain JP Morgan, conducted a very elaborate insurance scam by switching the boat with another one, which was a complete wreck, and they decided to write it off and get rid of these key members of that were objecting to the Federal Reserve introduction at the same time. So two hits for the price of one there. But anyway, that's another matter, and we'll be here all night.
The other ship was called the Olympic, so it was really a big swap. But anyway, we continue with 9/11. That's another big inside job.
Exactly. I digress with the Titanic stuff, but let's spend a couple of minutes on 9/11 because it's the best example of how predictive programming is done, this one individual event. And when you really get into it, you come to understand that the planning for the events of September 11th, 2001 would have been in place for decades before it actually happened. And that stuns people. It wasn't just years, but it was decades. This was such a major event, and it led to so many major changes in human society that it was something that was planned for a very long time before. And there's indicators that that was the case. There are also indicators that that was the case with the recent Paris false flag terror events as well. That's another big one, and that is intended to lead to some major changes in human activity as well. It already has, but we can get onto that in time and keep it topical that way. Okay. But when it comes to 9/11, there are so many examples of aspects of that fateful day that were encoded into movies and TV shows and music videos. I've just included a few here. But if people have never looked into this and they want to go onto YouTube and look at some of the videos that people have compiled, there are many, many minutes, several minutes. Some of these videos go on for like 30, 40 minutes, just consisting of little clips of clues and indicators and symbolic depictions of the events of 9/11, which happened in the years leading up to 2001. So the example I've got on the screen here is from the Independence Day movie in 1996. And there's a split screen image there of a clock counting down. And we get the time 9/11:01. So they've got the date of the event right down to the year in a split second image, which would have gone straight into the subconscious mind of the viewing public. As split second flashes like that are designed to do, it bypasses the capacity for the conscious mind to truly process what's going on and logically analyze it. It's a symbolic depiction which is absorbed by the subconscious mind, which doesn't do that kind of logical analysis, but it lodges everything that it sees and everything that it absorbs into the recesses of the subconscious mind, and that can later be called upon in terms of dictating behaviors or thoughts or actions for the individual without them realizing where it comes from, because it's buried away there. And it's also where our dreams come from, interestingly, and is the basis of many of those. Anyway, another one was the passport of the Neo character in the first Matrix movie, which came out in 1999. So it's 2 years before the events of 9/11. And you notice the expiry date on Neo's passport is the 11th of September 2001. What were the chances? There's a compilation here of some of the many depictions of aspects of 9/11, from clocks to the towers blowing up in various movies to planes seen to be going into the towers. So many. I mean, where do you even start? The Simpsons were involved as well. This is a famous example of predictive programming for 9/11. There was an episode of The Simpsons in the late 90s where they hold up a comic and you have a picture of New York on the cover, and the price on it is $9. And then you have the two twin towers there looking like an 11. So it's a quite clear reference to 9/11 in The Simpsons. Who noticed it at the time? Who realized the significance of it? It's only after the event that you get to notice so many of these depictions. There's a compilation there of a whole bunch of cartoons that did exactly the same thing. Keeping with music industry stuff, there was a very iconic album released by Jay-Z, who's a major asset of the corporate entertainment industry and a very heavily puppeteered and controlled artist. As many people will have come to realize, it took me a long time to grudgingly come to that acceptance, because being a hip-hop fan of so many decades, I used to think Jay-Z was a lyrical genius, and I had a lot of respect for him because he was obviously the most high-profile hip-hop MC out there, and I thought he was, this incredible artist. But the truth is the truth, and evidence has a habit of coming along and slapping you in the face and throwing a bucket of cold water over you to wake you up to what's obvious and blatant. And I had to come to realize the degree to which he's absolutely controlled by the corporate forces behind the industry. So he put out this album, The Blueprint, interesting name in light of the events of 9/11, and it just happened to be released on September 11th, 2001, as we can see from the top of this Amazon page release here. What were the chances? We have a Michael Jackson album, which came out in 1997, called Blood on the Dance Floor. Lots of interesting imagery there. He's dancing on a sort of Masonic checkerboard floor with the polarity between black and white being depicted there. The sort of duality between night and day, good and evil, all these different sort of dualities and polarities which are inherent in creation again. And it's a design that you see on the floor of Masonic lodges. And it also represents base consciousness when you really get down to it, the absolute sort of minimum level of conscious awareness that a human being can operate with just to kind of make it in this physical reality day by day, but absolutely cut off from their true spiritual nature and higher levels of consciousness. So there's lots of different dynamics being depicted there. You have Michael Jackson in his blood red suit, and that is a color which is commonly associated with Saturn, as is black. They are the two principal colors of Saturn. And when you get into the true nature of this kind of dark occult priest class, which is running all aspects of the entertainment industry at the very top levels, you come to realize that there's an absolute reverence and worship for Saturn and its influences on human activity. Why would that be? Why is there such a reverence for Saturn? That's a deep question in its own right. But either way, it's there. And we see many depictions of Saturn cropping up on these things as well, which ties into Satanism, of course. No accident that those two words are so similar. Satanism is Saturnism. Those two, aspects are inherently linked as well. This album was called Blood on the Dance Floor. So there's more kind of sort of links to Masonic ritual activity there, in terms of some of the stuff that we hear goes on in Masonic rituals. And we have a city skyscape in the background, which looks very similar to Manhattan, which is sort of crumbling to dust in a massive explosion. And to me, that seems to be another subtly encoded depiction of what was going to happen on 9/11, 4 years before it actually did when this album came out. Michael Jackson, another very heavily puppeteered and controlled artist, an asset of the corporate industry, almost certainly a victim of trauma-based mind control, as so many of your favorite A-list artists would have been when you really get into that whole subject area. There was an album by...
Can I ask one question, Mark? Did you
Sure.
think that he was trying to break free shortly before he was, I think, murdered?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Michael Jackson was starting to break free from his mind control programming, and he was starting to get back some of his humanity. He made a lot of speeches in his latter years criticizing the Sony Corporation, of which he was a part. He was at an Al Sharpton rally event on one occasion where he publicly branded Tommy Mottola, who was the CEO of the Sony Corporation at the time, as the devil. And he described the Sony Corporation as evil. And he started to talk about how they oppress and enslave their artists and how they give them such a raw deal in terms of the royalty payments that they get, and how Sony is just completely screwing its artists over, you know. And these are public statements that are shocking to hear coming from an A-list artist. And unfortunately, when you are an owned asset of the industry and you come out and make statements like that, you're going to upset a lot of people, and they're not going to be very happy with you saying these things, because people do tend to take notice of what celebrities say. All this stuff that I'm saying to you today, can you imagine if this was coming from the mouth of David Beckham here in the UK? I know it's very unlikely to hear David Beckham talking about this stuff, but just imagine if he did, or just imagine if Kim Kardashian got up and started talking about all this stuff. You know, here we are, we're two guys talking to whatever audience we've got tonight, but if Kim Kardashian was up on a public stage talking about all this stuff, it would be headline news around the world the next day. People at water coolers at work would be talking about nothing else. It would be all over the gossip mags and the papers, purely because it came from a celebrity. That's the cult of celebrity. And so Michael Jackson coming out and making these comments about Sony being an evil corporation would have made him a lot of enemies. But I really think that he was starting to come out of that mind-controlled state, which he would have been put in from a very early age. We've heard the stories of Michael Jackson's father, Joe Jackson, who was a very overbearing, dominant kind of showbiz dad, and he kind of forced his kids into a career in showbiz, because the stories are that Joe Jackson wanted to be a performer himself, but he lacked the talent to kind of make a go of it. And so he decided to put his kids into the industry and make a whole shed load of money through them. And it seems clear that there came a point where his kids were kind of taken and brought into the industry and treated as assets of it. And that's where the mind control elements came in. And that's where some of this dark, occult, satanic stuff that sadly permeates the entertainment industry came in as well. And so Michael Jackson was sent down that route, and he probably spent most of his career in a heavily trauma-based mind control state when you get into the areas of MK Ultra and Monarch programming. And so most of the actions that he undertook and the kind of motions that he went through were in that kind of state. He wasn't in full possession of his mental capacities, because that's what they do to many of these artists. They just turn them into performing automatons, robots. But I do think he started to regain some of his humanity. And I think it's no accident or coincidence or any strange thing that he was fitted up by those two allegations of child abuse. People have very different opinions on this. Some people think that he was a paedophile and that these allegations were perfectly founded. My view is they are a classic way of discrediting someone that is getting a little too close to the truth and is starting to say things that are gaining the attention of the public and waking people up. And you know, they're putting truths out there that certain parties would prefer weren't put out there. And they have various ways of discrediting people that do that. They can make out that they're mentally ill. They can fit them up with some kind of legal case, like a massive tax bill, which was landed on Lauryn Hill, who was another artist that emerged out of the Sony Corporation that recently has started being very critical publicly of the true nature of the industry and of that particular corporation. And what happened to her a few years ago? They slapped a massive $968 million tax bill on her and sent her to jail for 3 months because she couldn't pay it. It's a classic way of shutting these people up and discrediting them in the eyes of the public, who just read the headlines and take away from it whatever they're supposed to take away. Oh, Lauryn Hill didn't pay her tax bill. Oh, God, that's terrible. Or, oh, Michael Jackson, he's a wrong un, isn't he? I remember those cases where he's supposed to have been messing about with those kids. So in his case, I really think those two legal cases were slapped on him as a way of discrediting what he was starting to say at the time. And then, of course, we know the rest. 2009, 25th of June, he dies suddenly. It shocks the world. Who saw that coming? But either way, no more comments from Michael Jackson, no more criticism of Sony, and no more secrets are going to be coming from that particular individual. So, job done there as far as the industry is concerned.
And the good news for Sony is they can still make money, and they still make money on behalf of Michael Jackson. So, but please continue. We got a lot of things to cover here.
Yeah, sure. We digress. It's easy to do with these subjects. But yeah, there's the old adage that an artist is worth more to a corporation dead than alive. Yes. And we've heard the same things with regard to Tupac on that front. There's a bloody hologram that they've started wheeling out of Tupac, who was murdered back in 1996, of course. And at Coachella, the Coachella Festival in California a few years ago, they unveiled this bloody digital hologram of him performing on stage. So, the poor guy's been in his grave for nearly 20 years, but they're still making money off him by parading a frigging hologram of him on stage. So it seems just because an artist is no longer with us in this physical realm, they're not necessarily no longer making money for the corporation. Anyway, let's get back on track. This image that I have on screen is from a little known hip hop act known as The Coup. And this sleeve came out for an album called Party Music of theirs in June 2001. So it's just a few weeks before the events of September 11th, 2001. And you can see there's a depiction of the Twin Towers blowing up in exactly the same way as they appeared to do on September 11th, 2001. And we have one of the artists from the group down here holding what looks like a remote control detonator, which he's just pressed, at which point the towers are exploding. So is that wild coincidence, or does that suggest some sort of inside knowledge and complicity on the part of whoever was behind that album and behind that group? People can answer that question for themselves. This is the classic album that I always show, and it usually gets gasps of awe from an audience at a public talk when they've not seen it before. This is an album by the British group Supertramp. It's called Breakfast in America, and it came out in 1979. So this is why I was saying earlier that there would have been inside knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11 a few years and decades before it actually did. So 1979 here. You've got the wording of the group Supertramp across an image of the Manhattan skyline, and you can see that this image is being viewed from the vantage point of an airplane cabin, and there's the waitress there taking the place of the Statue of Liberty. Somebody worked out, because there's vigilant researchers everywhere now that are all over these things, and there seems to be no aspect of predictive programming that doesn't get uncovered by somebody somewhere at some point, such as the attention that's being given to this subject area now. Somebody worked out if you do a mirror image reversal of this particular sleeve, you get a very interesting effect happening with those two letters from the Supertramp logo. They appear to turn into a 9 and an 11 directly over the two twin towers there. And again, I would remind people that this is a view from an aeroplane cabin. So again, certain individuals may choose to put that down to coincidence. I'll let people decide, but what were the chances of that happening by accident? Very slim, I would suggest. There's a Prince concert which happened in December 1998, at the end of which Prince said something very interesting. This is the dialogue. He said, "We got one more, then we got to get out. I got to go home, you all. Got to get home to America. Got to go get ready for the bombs. Osama bin Laden getting ready to bomb. Yeah." This was in 1998. And I've said before that if he'd just left the statement at that, People might not think it was so strange because in 1998, Osama bin Laden was already being branded as public enemy number one. He'd had the Oklahoma City bombing pinned on him, along with various other crimes. And so you could have put it down to that, if it weren't for the fact that Prince then added 2001 hit me. What was the significance of adding that phrase? Why was it necessary to say 2001? There's another question which people might like to ask themselves. A more recent example of predictive programming in a music video came from this one, Lil Wayne. It was the video to his song My Home Is Still. Toxic piece of garbage, of course, which most so-called hip-hop these days is. But there you go. The kids seem to dig it, unfortunately. And there's a split-second image in this video where he's in a movie theater surrounded by 12 skeletons. And this video came out in 2012, just a few days before the Aurora, Colorado shooting, or non-shooting, where we're told 12 people were shot to death in a movie theater in Aurora when this lone nutter went on the rampage during a midnight showing of the Batman movie, The Dark Knight. So for what reason would Lil Wayne be in a theater with 12 skeletons a few days before that event happened? We'll attempt to answer that as we wrap up this section. I like to throw this one in as well because it's got relevance, I feel, to the chemtrailing geoengineering agenda, which I'm sure most people will be familiar with. One of the main constituents of chemtrails, we're told, one of the main sort of nanoparticle heavy metal constituents that we get is strontium. Personally, I'd never heard of strontium before I started looking into chemtrails, but you hear that aluminium, barium, and strontium are the sort of key components in this. And somebody, again, incredibly worked out that there was a line of dialogue in an episode of Doctor Who, which came out of the BBC, those nice people, you know, in 1984, an episode called The Caves of Androzani. There's a character called Morgus, and he uttered a line of dialogue which said, as they used to say on Earth, every cloud has a strontium lining. And to me, that smacks of preparing subliminally the general public for what was known to be coming in the decades ahead as they rolled out this insane chemtrailing agenda. And it was helping the official version of that narrative to more readily sink into the minds of the public and to make it more acceptable. There's a filmmaker called Tom Secker in the UK who looked into some of the aspects of the 7/7 bombings of 2005 and the way that they seem to be predicted in the BBC show Spooks, a drama which aired for quite a few years on BBC One. Many aspects of the narrative seem to get predicted in it. Also, the Lee Rigby Woolwich incident, or non-incident, of May 2013, that one's pretty much been proven to be a fake hoax event. It's been debunked. It didn't happen the way we were told it did, which is the case with pretty much all so-called news events these days, unfortunately. You know, the Paris thing of the other day was no different when you get down to it. And Tom Secker got into some of the fine detail of how spooks seem to foreshadow what happened in the Lee Rigby incident. So just very quickly, in the Spooks narrative, there was a Michael character, a British Muslim convert of Nigerian descent, which was the background details of Michael Adebolajo, who we're told was the ringleader of the Woolwich event. He gets co-opted by British intelligence services to infiltrate a terrorist cell. When the female character is discovered, she gets killed by means of a large kitchen knife. We're told that Lee Rigby was stabbed up as well. Female character's name just happens to be Lee. You know, all these familiar elements that we see in place in these works of apparent fiction before any of these major events happen. This one was the James Bond movie Diamonds Are Forever, which came out in 1971, 2 years after the supposed Apollo moon landings. And I think we can agree, or hopefully we can, that the Apollo moon landings of 1969 were also staged and were a hoax and didn't happen the way we've been told they did. Why would anyone paying attention and being vigilant to what goes on be surprised at that? Because they've been doing this forever. But anyway, it did seem to me as if somebody behind this movie was having a little sort of laugh and a little taking the piss, basically, by putting this scene in where you've got Sean Connery's Bond and he's in this sort of underground research facility that he penetrates, which is very similar to what we hear about Area 51 in Nevada because it's in the Nevada desert just outside Las Vegas. And he's trying to get away from these villains, and he runs across what appears to be a rigged up film set of the moon landings. And you've got these two astronauts playing the part of these guys walking on the moon, and they're all sort of in slow motion, and Bond's running across this film set and they're trying to get him. And it just looks to be a little sort of knowing nudge towards those with the eyes to see, saying, yeah, the moon landings were fake, and here we are telling you about it. And just before we wrap up this section, then, a couple of examples from this year of events which appear to have been foreshadowed. There was a Germanwings plane crash in March of this year, where this plane going from Barcelona to Dusseldorf down over the French Alps. And in the official version of the story, we're told that the co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, was depressed and was mentally ill, and he engineered an opportunity to lock himself into the cabin and fly the plane deliberately into the ground, killing everyone on board. And then it turned out a short while after that there had been a movie, an Argentinian movie, released a short while before called Wild Tales. And it was 6 short stories done in the form of dark comedy. And in one of the stories, there was an airline pilot who decided to get revenge on a bunch of people in his life that he didn't like anymore. And so he tricked them all into coming on board one of his flights. And during the flight, he engineered an opportunity to lock himself into the cockpit, and he deliberately flew the plane into the ground, killing everyone on board. So there's an aspect of what we're told happened being done right there in plain sight. And then we had Kingsmen, the Secret Service movie, proper piece of bloody propaganda for the British establishment. That movie was terrible. But anyway, it was used to put in this scene of a mass slaughter inside a church congregation. You got Colin Firth's character, who's an intelligence agent, and in a mind-controlled state, he goes on the rampage in this church and slaughters the entire congregation. And this happened just a short while before, we're told, a character called Dylan Avery Roof went on the rampage in this church in Charleston, South Carolina, and did exactly the same thing there. So we're getting people used to what they're going to be told via the mainstream media in terms of all these events, by putting it into their subconscious mind in the form of movies and TV shows and such. Just remind me, Johan, you showed those 2 videos of me the other week. Is most of this content recapping on that?
No, because this is all new, and you did mostly on the music industry. This is you did this in Copenhagen a little bit, but it's okay because people didn't see that, and they can see that, of course, now on YouTube as well. But it's good. I'd like to add that one of the actors, the so-called actors at the Aurora shooting, was also present in Paris again, and also on 2 other occasions as well. So people also start to notice that the same people are around these so-called terror attacks, and everything becomes more and more clear that they're all staged, and they are using us. They're used as an instrument for an agenda, for the rollout of an agenda. So that's good. But what I like, Mark, very much is that you have so many details adding to all this, and it's a delight to listen to you. So if you have,
sure, I just didn't want to repeat what I'd already said. If all this stuff went out the other week, I didn't want to be repeating all the same detail. So
no, you don't. No.
Okay, good, because I could do a David Icke style 8-hour all dayer on this, really. I really like the idea of just starting at 10 in the morning and taking the whole day to unpack all this stuff and show how it all fits together. Sometimes it's so difficult to get it into a 2-hour show because it's so deep. And this is only one aspect of what's being done to us. It's just one aspect of daily human activity. I've chose to focus on the entertainment industry and the music industry, but somebody else might choose to talk about false flag terror events, as our friend Ule Dammergaard does. Somebody might choose to talk about chemtrailing or GM foods or vaccines. You could talk about those subjects all day in themselves, and then you come to realize that it all ties in and it all fits together. It's just absolutely insane, but we'll try and stay on track with it. So at this point, I would just like to give the 3 main reasons that are usually offered as to why predictive programming is done. Okay, so the first one, as I just touched on, is by giving you a visual representation of something which is known to be coming. They're getting the general public en masse familiar with the official narrative of the event. And it doesn't matter whether the event that comes to pass is a staged hoax, because most of them are. A lot of them do involve actors. And when you get a false flag so-called terror event, it's often very difficult to work out whether any genuine people really died, or whether the parts of dead people were played by crisis actors, because it's a fact that they do use these individuals. It's incredible to me that people will take a paycheck and are so lacking in personal morals that they're prepared to deceive the world in this horrendous way. You know, it just astounds me that people are prepared to do this, but they do. It's been proven to be the case that crisis actors are often used to play these parts. So sometimes you have people genuinely killed. Sometimes you have crisis actors playing the part of the people that are killed and nobody actually dies. And sometimes it's a combination of the two. And it can be very, very difficult for researchers to work out which is the case. I was chatting with Ule Damagard yesterday about this, about the Paris thing. And, you know, he's pretty much the go-to guy on all this. He's an expert on false flag. He's the world's authority on it. And yet he can't establish whether anyone genuinely died in the Paris events, or whether the parts were played by actors, or whether it's a combination of the two. It's very difficult to do that. But it doesn't matter whether an event was a hoax or whether it went off exactly the way the mainstream media told us it did. What's important to them, to the controllers doing this, is that the official version of the narrative, the story that they want the general public to believe, is readily accepted. And to help people accept what they're told by the mainstream news, they put these depictions of it into movies and TV shows and stuff. So when you view it, again, it goes into the subconscious mind, which is where symbolism lives, where images live, where they're absorbed and where they're processed, but they're not logically examined. That happens in the conscious mind, and the conscious mind can't handle the sheer amount of information that goes into the subconscious. So it kind of cherry picks those aspects of what the subconscious mind has absorbed to critically analyze and make sense of and apply it to, you know, the individual's daily life. The rest of that imagery sits there subconsciously and gets drawn on without the person being consciously aware of it. So that's very important. That's one reason why they do it, to gain a familiarity with what they're later going to tell you happened, so that you believe what you're told. And of course, most of the time it's bullshit. That's reason one. Reason two, which a lot of researchers and people that have looked into this subject have offered up as an example, as an explanation, is that everything in existence is energy, something that I came to understand a while back. Everything is universal energy, resonating at an endless array of different frequencies. And it's all about what we see coming into physical manifestation is all about the rate of vibration of that particular energy. And so you can synchronize energetic frequencies as well and make a connection with these different expressions of energy. And you know, this can be brought about. I'm not explaining this bit as well as I normally do. I'm a bit under the weather, as I say. I'm just trying to get across the fact that when you view something like this scene in a movie, on an unseen level, unknown to the individual, you are making an energetic connection with it. And a lot of people believe that when large numbers of people, millions of people that go to see a movie, and they view a particular scene, which goes into their subconscious, because they're giving their attention to it, what's the phrase? Energy goes where attention flows, or energy flows where attention goes. Because you're making an energetic connection with it on that unseen level, you're helping to empower that kind of scenario on an energetic basis. So the idea is that when they depict a scene of something that they want to bring into physicality, when millions of people are all looking at it and giving their attention to it, it helps to manifest into reality that which they later do. Because we've all heard about how we can shape the sort of reality that we experience with our will and our intent. And if you focus on something hard enough and for long enough, and if you know what you're doing and you can really tune in and get into that zone, you can actually have an effect on the sort of experiences that you have on an individual level. And of course, that can also happen on a collective basis when you've got millions of people all pooling their attention and their energy and their consciousness in the same direction. So that's a second reason given as to why predictive programming is employed. The third reason, which is the one that I focus on the most because I think it's the most potent and it's the most important and it's the key to understanding why this is done, is down to the fact that the controllers that we have in this world feel the need to announce to us what they're doing. They like to place it in plain sight. Before they go ahead and do something, they like to give us a depiction of it to let us know what they plan to do. They do it in cryptic, encoded form. Often they do it in the form of numbers. They don't even use these kind of images. And so it's done in a very underhand sort of way. And it's done in a way that nobody could really reasonably be expected to understand in advance. So if you see this scene in the Kingsman movie and you see Colin Firth going into a church and slaughtering the congregation, who really could be expected to draw from that the fact that in a few weeks' time they plan to pull off a stunt where this lone nutter goes into a church in South Carolina and slaughters the congregation? But nevertheless, that seems to be the reason why they're doing it. We are talking about mentally ill, demented psychopaths and dark occultists here, who are unfortunately the people that are running all aspects of human society. And they are the individuals that are running the entertainment business at the very upper levels, and they're dictating everything that gets done as it goes down through the sort of hierarchical ranks. And they do seem to think that if they can announce in advance what they intend to do in terms of world events, when they don't get any kind of objection from us, the general public, it gives them a green light to go right ahead and do it and to avoid the karmic consequence of what would ordinarily happen. I'm going to skip through the slideshow here just to this one because it picks up on what I'm talking about, and we can go back to some of the others. But we're back to a quote from Mark Pateo. Again, no apologies for quoting him because he just does it so well and he gets across what people need to understand. He got into this subject in one of his radio broadcasts, and what he had to say very much chimes with what I've come to understand about why this is done. He said, one of the dark principles of their ideological tenets is that if you tell people what you're doing, even if it's telling them wordlessly through symbols or numbers, then you've somehow gotten their implied consent because they haven't said no. And to not say no is to tacitly say yes in their mentality. So that, in their mind, relieves the burden of karma that would ordinarily come down upon them for directing these actions. Because they don't actually take these actions, they get their order-following house slave dogs to do it for them. He gets on his hobby horse a bit about order followers, as we know. In their mind, because they told you in a wordless occult way, then in some way that alleviates the karma because they did say it in some form. It's a sick, twisted way of looking at it. Yes, it is. And this is where we start to come around kind of in a circle to natural law and free will consciousness, which is what I first started talking about. It seems to me that the dark priest class, the controllers, absolutely understand how natural law, universal law, works. They do understand the tenet that you should not do unto others what you do not want done unto yourself. And they do understand the idea of do no harm. But they seem to think that if you give people advance warning of what you plan to do, and then they don't say that you can't do it, they've then got your implied consent and your tacit approval to go right ahead and do it. And they feel that the consequence, the karmic consequence that would ordinarily come is then off of them and on to the individuals that have been told. They've been told, they didn't object, they didn't say that it can't be done, therefore they chose the action, they approved it. It sounds sick and twisted, but we're talking about sick and twisted people. And I hope that makes sense. It goes kind of back to the illustration of if somebody tells you to go out and punch somebody in the street, who bears the culpability for that? Well, it's the person that made the free will decision to go out there and punch somebody in the street. It doesn't matter that somebody told them to do it. They still took the free will decision to go out and perform that action. And so the karmic burden is on them rather than the person that told them to go and do it. So here, in their sick, twisted mentality, the burden of karma is on the individuals that said they were okay about this by not saying it can't be done, and therefore the burden is off of them. It really does seem a distorted and perverted way of looking at it for anyone with their mental capabilities intact and their humanity intact. But, you know, you really have to try and get inside the mindset of these sick individuals that are directing these actions, because these people aren't well, as I think we can see. And a couple of other examples from other researchers and authors that back up this whole idea. Fritz Springmeier, the author that's done so much work into trauma-based mind control and the workings of the dark occult and so many other areas, made this quote in an interview with me. He said, there's a reference in scripture where Satan has to come before God to ask permission to mess with Job's life. So people who are religious will often say that God insists that evil broadcasts what it's going to do. You don't just have a free ticket to go ahead and do evil, but you have to tell. It's called revelation of the method. And then Thomas Sheridan made a comment in a radio interview where he said, telling us is part of the magic. We have to consent. That's the key. That's the key word. That's the key dynamic. Us consenting through our free will consciousness. We have the capacity to consent or not to consent. And they're jumping on this, they're hijacking it, and they're using it against us. He says that's why they blow the whistle on what they do through all kinds of books and movies and so on. And they'll often show us a hint of things before they do them. And this is how their sorcery, their black hexen paganism works. You have to be told. And he went on to say, this is why Dracula always knocked on the door and asked to be let in. He has to be invited. The devil has to be invited in. Then you forfeited your right to say, I was taken by surprise. No, you brought it in. This is why we all have to learn what they're doing to us, because the only thing that's keeping them in power is our acquiescence to their pathological drive. And the best weapon we have against them is our refusal. Absolutely. And I'll just throw another example in there. A friend of mine recently dug out this comment that Jimmy Savile made in a TV appearance on David Frost's Through the Keyhole. Sir David Frost, actually. I don't know if I should mention Sir. The Sir bit seems to be important in all these things. Sirs seem to crop up a lot when you get into the inside story of the music industry. And of course, he was Sir Jimmy Savile. I'm sure people know all about the activities of Jimmy Savile. We won't recap on those here. But there was a TV performance where he came on and Savile was always full of bluster and bullshit, you know, and never gave a straight answer to interviews. He was always full of himself. But he had this T-shirt on saying, I'm trying to remember the caption. I think it was a warning. You know, you have to give them warning. And so David Frost says to him, what's all this about, Jimmy? You know, what's this caption on your T-shirt? And he says, you have to give them warning. Victims, you have to give them fair warning. And to anyone watching, it would have seemed like just this throwaway comment, typical Savile bullshit. Who knows what that guy talks about? But it very much ties into what we're talking about here. He said, you have to give them warning. Victims. And God knows Jimmy Savile had enough victims with all the stuff that he would have been up to at the time. And he seemed to be communicating this same dynamic, that as long as you give people some kind of indication of what it is you're doing, then the onus is on them to make sense of it and to withdraw their approval and their consent for it. You know, they're supposed to be able to decipher what you mean by this. But as long as you've removed that burden from yourself and placed it on the viewing public, then you no longer have to bear the karmic consequence of this. I really do feel that this is their mentality. And to me, it makes sense of why they do so much of this, why they place all these elements of predictive programming into all these movies and TV shows and cartoons, music videos. Why else would they be doing it? Why would they do this stuff years and decades in advance? Why would there be massive complicity between makers of Hollywood movies and TV shows and stuff, and those that control the music industry, and those parties that actually bring about things like 9/11, 7/7, Sandy Hook, the Paris attacks, and all of this? Why would it be so important to them to put all these depictions of it into these works of fiction if there weren't some kind of spiritual, esoteric component to it? Another example to throw in here, which also illustrates the same dynamic, was the Exorcist movie, 1973. Anyone that's seen it will doubtless recall that the girl, Linda Blair's character, Reagan, is possessed by this demonic entity, but it only occurs after she's messed about with a Ouija board that she's found in the cellar. So her messing about with the Ouija board is opening up the portal through which this demonic entity can enter into her. And it's basically the invitation to this entity to come through from, that dimension into this one. It's a very important part of that movie's story, I think, that it only occurs after this invitation has been made. Then we had the Wicker Man movie, which was the same year, actually, 1973. Amazing movie. Anyone that's seen it will doubtless recall that you've got Edward Woodward's policeman character who is investigating this missing girl, and he goes to this remote Scottish island, which is inhabited by this pagan community of occultists, and he becomes a human sacrifice at the very end of the movie in this giant effigy of the Wicker Man. But the Christopher Lee character, who's like the leading occultist, makes a point of saying he came of his own free will. And he's a legitimate sacrifice because he came of his own free will. Nobody forced him to come to the island. He was tricked into it, of course, because he believed he was looking for this missing girl who turned out to be a part of this cult, and she wasn't missing at all. So he went there with good intentions, but nevertheless, he took the decision to go there. Nobody forced him to. And that, in their mind, makes him legitimate as a human sacrifice in the narrative of this movie. But it's the same idea being presented. We have a quote from the Truman Show movie starring Jim Carrey, who of course is this character that lives his entire life in this massive reality TV show where the whole world is watching him, and he doesn't realize until very late in the day that his entire life has been this artificial lie. And when he does realize, he attempts to escape from it, but realizes he can't because he's enclosed in this kind of bubble, this reality that he's been living in. But his handler, this character Christoph, makes a point of saying in this line of dialogue, he could leave at any time. If his was more than just vague ambition, if he was absolutely determined to discover the truth, there's no way we could prevent him. So it's a recognition of the fact that we have free will consciousness and that we can make these decisions for ourselves to consent or not to consent to a situation. And what we get manifested as a result is directly linked to our free will consciousness. I should probably go back over a few here because I just wanted to take it back to the music industry briefly and show some of these symbols that have been going into music videos and record sleeves and such, because it all ties into the same thing. And just to keep it relevant to the music industry, I'll throw a few of these in. It was pointed out that back in 1985, in the movie Desperately Seeking Susan, we saw Madonna with a jacket. And on the back of the jacket, there was a pyramid with an illuminated capstone with an all-seeing eye in it. And this is very interesting imagery for anyone that looks into all this esoteric stuff. It's very similar to the image that we see on the reverse of the US dollar bill. And of course, it's very much tied into Freemasonry and Illuminati imagery. And we're seeing this stuff crop up in music videos all the time now. But who noticed this back in 1985, going back 30 years? This was flashed on screen, and there would have been very few people back then that would have made sense of what this symbology was. It would have gone straight into the subconscious mind of the viewing general public way back then. We didn't have the internet then. We weren't able to share all this information the way so many people are now. And there really are a lot of people who are awake to this stuff now and conscious of all this symbology and stuff that's being used against us, largely thanks to the internet. But back in 1985, we didn't have that. And this stuff's been going on forever. This is a familiar symbol that we've seen so much in music videos and live stage shows, particularly perpetrated by Jay-Z. It's one of his favorites, and he refers to it as the rock sign. And he claims to have invented it in this 2009 interview, which has since disappeared from YouTube, so you can't get that anymore. But he did claim that this was the rock sign, and it was linked to his record label, which when he first came out was called Rockefeller Records. Interesting choice of name. And it was later morphed into Rock Nation. But Jay-Z was very fond of throwing up this sign, and it's the sort of pyramid shape that you make with your fingers and thumbs, and it's held up above the eye there. And so you've got the all-seeing eye and this sort of pyramid connotation. And you see Kanye West doing it here in combination with Jay-Z. It gets thrown up in live stage shows and stuff. And it turns out not to be a modern invention at all. It goes back into ancient civilizations, and it's been used in various occult secret societies through the ages. Here's Anton LaVey, the high priest of the Church of Satan, doing the very same symbol back in the 1960s. So straight away, you can see it's no modern thing. Why would Jay-Z be depicting that in his stage shows and stuff? Why would he choose to do that? Then there's a composite picture here of some favorite symbols that we see all the time. We've got that same triangular pyramid thing going on. We've got the highlighting of the eyes, and we've got the picture down here of the fingers and thumbs being held up in the form of a 6. I think we've got some more of those. There's Beyonce doing it at the Grammys show of a few years ago. And this is evoking 2 6s. And it ties into the number 666, of course, the number of the beast as foretold in the book of Revelation, and the number which was very much associated with Aleister Crowley, the famous dark occultist. He was said to be known as the beast, 666. The number is also very much heavily connected to Saturn, and it's also connected to the base consciousness that we spoke about earlier. It's a very important number in dark occult numerology. And we have A-list artists within the music industry giving us different depictions of this number 666. It's been interpreted by many different researchers as, that's what she's doing here. That's what they're trying to get across when they keep throwing up these hand signs. Why would these world leaders be giving us this same symbol? The innocent cover story for it, because all these hand signs come with one, is that it's just saying, okay. It's supposed to mean, yeah, everything's cool, everything's fine, which is why they hold up these fingers. But we know that everything comes with its own innocent sounding cover story. And we know that the truth is often very different to what we're told by these professional liars. So I think there's something very different going on here, and they're flashing up the 6s. So there we are. That's what it's intended to put across.
Yeah, because when you focus on the, can you put one back, Mark? Yeah, one more, please.
This one?
Yeah,
this one?
This one is good too. When you see the 6, of course, but the 3 fingers up also have a meaning. So you can also explain it as 666 because of the 3 fingers up.
Exactly, 6 to the power of 3, if you like.
Oh. Yeah.
And we humans only have 2 hands, so you can only do 2 at a time. If you had 3 hands, you could do it all. But yeah, it's pretty clear that that's what they're putting across. When you get into symbology, when you start studying the dark occult, when you start looking into Satanism, they're very dark areas. But if we want to understand what's being done to us, if we want to understand how our consent and free will consciousness is being used against us, then you need to look into these subject areas. These are the greatest gifts that we are given by the creative force behind the universe, the capacity for free will, the capacity to consent to things or not. And, it's being hijacked and it's being taken away from us and used against us. It's being weaponized. And we need to understand this, and we need to gain back our power, because it's the only way to reverse what's being done to us. I think we can probably, sum up some of that at the end as we finish off. But just to throw another picture into the mix here, here's an old one of the Beatles, Yellow Submarine. This would have been 1968, I believe. And some very interesting stuff going on here. We have Paul McCartney, or is it? If we get into the whole area of the suggestion that the original Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by an imposter, we really will be here all night. Maybe that's one for another show. But there's this whole world of research, which is known as PID, or Paul is dead, which goes into this very strong suggestion that the guy we think of today as Paul McCartney is not the original James Paul McCartney, and that somewhere along the line in 1966 he was replaced for whatever reason. I always put a sort of disclaimer or caveat on that one when I mention it by saying I do realize how preposterous and ridiculous that suggestion sounds when people hear it for the first time. It did to me, but do the research, look into it, have a look at the evidence, and see where it takes you, because there's a whole world of symbolic clues in terms of lyrics, in terms of Beatles album sleeves, in terms of little things that have been said in interviews over the years, in terms of strange anomalies and discrepancies over the decades that take some debunking. If somebody's going to scoff at this and say that's ridiculous, this can't possibly be true, they've got many, many hundred strange anomalies to debunk credibly before they can relax into the smug assurance that this can't possibly be the case. I just throw that in there for anyone that does want to do a bit of research into this area, because there's a whole wealth of information that you could delve into. So we'll leave that one there for now. But anyway, here we have the character thought of as McCartney throwing up that 6, and we have John Lennon doing the sort of horned hand sign, which is another favorite of the industry. Sometimes it's presented with the palm facing outwards, and sometimes it's presented with the palm facing inwards. There are said to be different meanings and different connotations of this particular symbol, but I would ask people to consider why it's being thrown up by so many prominent A-list artists so frequently. Here's a very sinister one of Eminem doing it. And here we've got a few world leaders, or puppets, I should probably say, doing the same thing. These nice people. And this one comes with the cover story that this particular symbol means "I love you," and it's supposed to be a capital I, a capital L, and a capital U in deaf sign language. And so here we've got these lovely, caring people, Obama and Hillary Clinton and Bush, because they're all about love, aren't they? They're really nice people, and they're just communicating that "I love you." Yeah, right. I think there's probably something else going on beneath the surface here. And sure enough, when you get into this symbol, you see that our old friend Anton LaVey of the Church of Satan was fond of this one too. And what it actually is a depiction of what's known as the horned hand. It's known as Il Mano Cornuto as well. It's evoking this kind of demonic entity that seems to be revered by the dark controllers of the entertainment industry. Many researchers think that it's a depiction of this entity known as Baphomet, this sort of androgynous otherworldly entity that was devised by Eliphas Levi in the 19th century, famous occultist and Freemason. And we see Baphomet cropping up quite a lot in music videos and record sleeves and things like that. And then other researchers say that it's supposed to be Pan or Moloch or some of these other entities that these dark occultists also seem to revere. Either way, I would ask what place it's got in the music industry. Why should these artists be throwing up this symbol? Why do we have supposed world leaders also flashing up this same symbol? What's being communicated here? And then I've put this composite picture in of so many of these artists doing the one eye thing, the one eye symbolism. This kind of ties into the image that we saw of the pyramid with the all-seeing eye inside the capstone. It's very Masonic. It's kind of a calling card of the Illuminati, if you want to refer to this network of secret societies by that name. And it's also another depiction of base consciousness. It's kind of shutting down one part of the duality, again, that exists in nature and which we humans need to be able to operate as fully functional, fully conscious beings. Duality has to be in place, and there has to be unity and balance between the two hemispheres of the brain and between all these different components that we have. And I think what they're communicating by covering up one eye is they're sort of shutting down that balance of unity in their consciousness. and they're showing that they've been degraded down to absolute base consciousness, the minimum level of consciousness that a human can operate with in this physical realm, again, just being totally cut off from higher spiritual and conscious capabilities. So in all these cases, it seems to me that we're getting little parts and little indicators and little reminders of the dark occult priest class and the network of these secret societies that own and control these artists. It's another aspect of putting all this stuff straight into the subconscious mind of the general public. So it gets lodged there and absorbed there, and it can have an effect on the thoughts and the behaviors and the emotions of these people at a later stage without them realizing where it's coming from. I think also it's partly a method of communication among themselves. To an occultist who sees an artist flashing up a sign such as this, it's an indication that this particular artist is a part of this program, is a part of this agenda, is a controlled and owned asset of this occult network that is running things. I think there's that method of communication going on as well. Definitely a kind of calling card or a motif or an emblem in that sense. So it is all about free will consciousness and consent in terms of the way the general public absorb all this stuff. And so moving on, just getting across this whole idea of consent, really. There are so many ways in which we are tricked into giving our implied consent or tacit approval in so many areas of our daily human lives. I'll just throw this one in. I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but this is the Georgia Guidestones, which is kind of like a public announcement of wish list of these deeply sick, dark controllers that we have presiding over humanity. They engraved some of the things that they wish to achieve into these granite guidestones in Georgia, which were put up there in 1980. And I suppose it's another aspect of them sort of putting their will and their intent out there for all to see, tying in with what I was saying earlier. If you apply your will to a particular situation enough, and you really focus on bringing it into physical manifestation, many people will tell you that you can actually bring about that kind of outcome through announcing that intention and really throwing it out there into the universe. We can all be doing this as well. This is not just the domain of these dark controllers. This is a dynamic which is available to all conscious individuals if we would learn how to apply our will and our intent to a particular situation. And if we had large numbers of people in human society that were all focusing on a better deal for humanity and a moral and just and free situation in which we could all live, that could be brought about very quickly. It is possible to overwrite this very malevolent system, this fear-based dynamic in which we're all living, this evil situation in which we find ourselves. It would be a very quick and fairly straightforward process to overwrite that with something much better and much freer and much fairer if people would learn how this dynamic works and apply it in their lives in massive numbers. I feel, digressing again, but sometimes you have to. So yeah, we had this wish list of the controllers of humanity, the powers that shouldn't be, and the main one that researchers have focused on is probably the most disturbing one, which is their wish to, as they put it, maintain humanity under 500 million or 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. So what's that all about? There's reckoned to be somewhere around 7 billion people currently on the planet, and they seem to be putting their wish into this set of guidestones to reduce that figure to 500 million, which is a pretty dangerous thing when you get into it. So it's not as if they haven't told us what they plan to do. And of course, anyone that's paying attention will be aware that there is a population reduction agenda in place, very much tied in with the eugenics movement and very much tied in with various aspects of Agenda 21 that's coming out of the United Nations. And there are various measures in place to do just that, reduce the global population. It's something that people do need to be aware of and pay attention to, I would suggest. But yes, it's all about them announcing what they want to do, and it's all about us giving our consent to it. And for the presentation that I did at New Horizons, so this would have been featured in the video of the other week, but it probably bears some repeating, I put together some other ways that I've identified in which our consent is kind of used against us, in which it's weaponized, in terms of them telling us what they're doing to us and giving us the opportunity to object, opt out, withdraw our consent. And when we don't, the emphasis is on us. We chose it, we bear the consequences. So one of the things that I identified was the fact that whenever they announce a foreign war, such as, you can't call it a war, but the massacre and the slaughter that has been announced in the last few days on Syria in the wake of these false flag bloody Paris hoaxes that happened the other week, they're telling us about it, aren't they? You know, we've had Cameron up there on the public stage in the UK saying we have to go and bomb Syria, we have to go after ISIS, and all this absolute bullshit that they try and sell to the general public as justification for their murderous actions. But you notice they never just go steaming right in to do it. You would think that if they just want to dominate a foreign nation, if they just want to cause mayhem and murder and war and bloodshed and take over natural resources and continue to occupy different parts of the world, they would just go right ahead and do it. But the fact that they feel the need to come up with some bogus bullshit excuse for doing it, like staging false flag terror events and inventing this so-called terror group called ISIS out of nowhere, I'm sure we all understand that there's no such thing in terms of the way it's presented to us, and it's actually Western governments and intelligence agencies that have created this group, same way as they did with Al-Qaeda, which you don't hear too much about these days, do you? They seem to have been retired. But they come up with these excuses for going into foreign nations and causing all this violence and madness. It's always pre-announced. They let us know what they're doing, and they seem to think that they can gain our consent in that way. I suppose the vast majority of the general public do still go ahead with these things because, unfortunately, the vast majority of the general public do still believe everything they see on the mainstream news and which they read in so-called newspapers, because it's so difficult for many people to accept that the world is so different to the way we've been brought up all our lives to believe that it is. And when you come to a grudging acceptance of the fact that the world is nothing like what we're told it is by governments and mainstream media, you have to make a lot of changes in your life in terms of your mindset and your whole paradigm. And sometimes that has physical repercussions in terms of, you know, your behaviors. Maybe you can't continue to work for a particular institution when you come to realize this. Maybe you have to give up a particular job. Maybe you can't be with a particular circle of friends. Maybe you can't be in a relationship with a particular person. You know, so it has a major impact on people's lives, which is why so many just live in denial of these blatant truths. And so many still go along with the official version of things because life is easier that way and less distressing. So unfortunately, when you have these puppet politicians up there saying, we need to go to war to protect these people and we need to strike against these ISIS terrorists because they're threatening our freedoms and our way of life, people do buy into it. And when they do, they feel they've got the green light to go right in. In Britain, we have a problem of institutionalized paedophilia. This will be the case in many other countries around the world as well, but it's been particularly highlighted in the UK because this is something that has actually made the mainstream headlines. The BBC, they're ones to know. They employed bloody Jimmy Savile for 50 years that was abusing children on publicly funded BBC premises for all those years. So the BBC would know a thing or two about it, but they have actually carried stories about how many prominent politicians are actually child rapists and have been through the years. It only ever seems to emerge after they've died. It's funny that, isn't it? We've heard about former British Prime Minister Edward Heath. We've heard about Cyril Smith. And of course, the stories about Savile only emerged after he'd actually died. So the implication is, oh, it's only the ones that are dead now that were into it. The ones that are alive still are okay, but this used to go on. But nevertheless, it's in the public domain, and the Daily Mail has carried stories about this. The BBC and all these other mainstream outlets has told us that we have major establishment figures and prominent entertainers from over the years that have been involved in paedophilia. So we can't say we didn't know. We can't say we weren't told. Of course, it's still going on. But the implication is that, it's a historic thing. And they seem to think this gets them off the hook. When you get into things like vaccines, which so many researchers will tell you are very harmful to human health, they're not a good idea. When you get into some of the stuff that's in them, formaldehyde and mercury and aborted human fetus and monkey brain tissue and all this other horrific stuff, you can see it's not a great idea to be putting that into the veins of young children with their immune system still trying to develop. It's not a great idea to put it into the bodies of adults either. But nevertheless, when you do the research, if you're diligent enough to look into these things, it is possible to discover what goes into vaccines. They, of course, hide it in chemical names with many syllables, and it's not immediately apparent what these things are. But, the internet is there, as we've said, for research, for anyone that cares to put in the time. And you can, with your own independent research, discover some of this stuff that goes into vaccines. So basically, they've told you what's in there. You've got the opportunity to research it and look into this stuff. And if you don't like the sound of it, you've got the opportunity to say, no, I'm not taking that into my body. Again, same dynamic. They're telling you, they're giving you the opportunity to object. When you don't object, they take it as consent. Same thing with fluoride, sodium fluoride, which is going into the water supply in many countries. It goes into toothpaste. Then you have aspartame, which is very damaging to human brain cells. Not a great idea to be ingesting it. And they put it in kids' squash and fizzy drinks, of course, and kids' sweets. And then you have E numbers full of chemical components. But guess what? It's always listed in the ingredients. Certainly is in the UK anyway. If you pick up a packet of sweets and it's got E numbers in it, you'll be able to see because it lists them. If you pick up a bottle of fizzy pop that you want to buy for your kids, it will tell you that there's aspartame in it. You've got the opportunity to make an informed decision not to buy that product. And if you choose to buy it anyway, they're off the hook as they see it. Your karma, your decision. And then famously, cigarettes, we all know packets of cigarettes come with the health risks listed. They tell you you could get cancer if you smoke. And if you go ahead and smoke anyway and you get cancer, your fault, not theirs. Okay, so CCTV on buses and in public buildings, they are obliged to tell you it's going on. So if you step on a bus and they're filming, there will be a sign saying CCTV in operation. You know you're being filmed, they've told you. Your consent. Speed cameras on roads, they always have to put a symbol up to tell you there's a speed camera. If you get caught by one, you were told. Small print in credit card and mobile phone contracts, all this stuff that you get, page after page of minute microscopic print that you need a bloody microscope to read, and nobody bothers because it's so boring. But that's where they hide away all the stuff that protects them if a situation arises. So they're off the hook. You signed it at the bottom. You didn't read it, but you signed it anyway because you can't get the mobile phone otherwise. And that protects them. If anything, works against them, they can say, well, you signed the contract, pal, so it's on you. And then police reading you your rights. If you get fitted up, famously, they say anything you say may be used against you. And so they've warned you. And so that's what it all is. And
the problem with the closed circuit television is that it's never working when we actually need images. Like in Paris, it wasn't working, and there are so many examples. So unfortunately, they're not used in our favor, but only in our disfavor, so to say. That's
well, so it seems. So it seems, especially when there's Israeli so-called security services that are in charge of the cameras. It always seems to be the case that Israeli security service cameras don't work. I don't know why anyone would hire an Israeli company based on their track record, but there it is. It's a fact. If anyone wants to get upset about that, it is a fact that in all these so-called terror events, the security cameras are always supposedly handled by Israeli security companies. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but there you go. So, what I've tried to show here, Johan, and I really hope I've tied all the pieces together, because I am aware that it's very kind of disparate and it jumps all over the place. And 1 minute I'm talking about Jay-Z videos, next minute I'm talking about the eternal truths of natural law. But I really hope that I've been able to show how this all ties together. It's something that I attempt to do in my public talks. It's something that I go into in great length in my book. In the book, it's 180,000 words over 20 chapters. So I'm really taking the time to break it down. I'm really taking the time to show many examples and bring in the work of lots of different researchers and scholars and authors into these areas over the years to attempt to show how it all fits together, because it does. And we have to understand how it all fits together. And people often say, well, what do we do about it? You know, it's all very well understanding these methods and what's being done to us, but how do we get out of it? And so it's clear to me that they're weaponizing consent and they're using our free will consciousness against us. So the answer simply has to be to withdraw the consent and to make it clear that there is no approval on our part. We do not consent to what is being done to us. And we have to make a very clear statement that that is the case. Why would they bother creating all these bogus terror events as an excuse to start all these foreign wars if they didn't need to get that consent from us on that tacit kind of level? Why would they need to encode all these things into movies and videos and stuff if they didn't need to get our consent that way and put it into our subliminal minds in that way? It's clear to me that they realize that they, just like us, are governed by these tenets of natural universal law, and they're trying to get themselves off the hook and get out of it. And if we can understand that they're using these methods for that reason, and if we understand that they know they're bound by these laws in the same way that we are, some solutions become clear, and some ways in which we can withdraw our consent and make it clear that we are not a party to this. And when you align yourself with truth, and when you open yourself up to higher levels of conscious awareness, you resonate with it and you come to understand the things that you need to do, and you come to be guided in your actions, and it becomes clear what ways in which you should be living your life in line with morality. So we understand that foreign wars are funded by our taxes to a very large extent. You know, we're tricked and manipulated into paying taxes, of course. And a lot of that comes from the fact that our parents are tricked into signing a birth certificate for us when we're born, which ties us into the whole sort of maritime admiralty law aspect of the so-called legal system that is operated. And we become a corporate commodity or asset owned by the Crown Corporation here in the UK and many other parts of the world. And that, as they see it, makes us their property. And, you know, they create a kind of corporate entity in our name. And that's the point at which we become bound to pay tax to the system. And when you come to understand that tax is used to fund these foreign massacres, you realize that a very good way of bringing an end to it would be for very large numbers of people to refuse to pay tax. Obviously, if a few individuals here and there decide to stop doing that, they could be very easily picked off and made examples of, and they're people that are going to get their door beaten down by, you know, armed thugs and thrown in jail to be made an example of. That is going to happen when only a few people are trying to make a stand. But if very, very large numbers of people, I'm talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, were all to come together and say, we're not paying our tax anymore, what are you going to do about it? They just don't have the resources and the numbers to be able to deal with that large amount of people. A good example in the UK would be a huge number of people just refusing to pay the BBC license fee, the TV license, which funds the BBC. We know that the BBC are liars and criminals every single night. They lie to the general public provably and blatantly about stuff that's going on in the world, and it's just pure fiction. I mean, Building 7, the footage of Building 7 on 9/11 collapsing behind the BBC reporter is proof positive of that, if anyone wants an example of it. And then we've got all these revelations about the paedophile ring, which is said to have existed and almost certainly still does within the BBC. So what the hell are we doing still paying to fund this disgusting organisation? There should be millions of people in the United Kingdom saying, we're not paying for this anymore. What are you going to do about it? If many, many millions of people are saying that, there's no way they can lock all these people down. They just don't have the resources to do it. So I'm putting those two out there as a couple of examples of things that can be done when large numbers of people are awakened to truth and are resolved to living their life in line with morality, in line with natural law, in line with, the do no harm but take no shit principle. There will be many other ways which become obvious to people in terms of steps that they need to take when they kind of resonate with these truths and get on that path and raise their consciousness in that way. And this is a process that needs to happen. And if there's anything that's offered me any kind of hope or optimism over the last few days, because there's not much that does these days, unfortunately, it's the fact that this latest Paris so-called terror attack is so blatantly and provably staged and is a hoax and is a false flag that I've seen many people in my circle of friends and associates that are starting to question aspects of it. And these are people that have never previously shown any kind of interest in conspiracy or truth issues. In fact, they've probably mocked them and laughed at them and had a good old chuckle, if the truth is known, at things that myself and other people have posted on Facebook and things that certain people say about stuff that's going on in the world. Many of these people would have just not taken notice and just written it all off as a conspiracy theory and had a bit of a laugh at it. But I'm seeing a lot of these people now, because the world has become that much more dangerous within the last couple of weeks, and because as far as people in the UK are concerned, it's getting a little bit close to home now. When an event goes off in Iraq or Afghanistan or even the United States, these places are far off lands. And, most people in the UK think, well, that doesn't affect me in my daily life. France is just across the English Channel from us here. It's very, very close. And I think a lot of people are reflecting on how easily that could have been London or somewhere else right here. And we're already hearing about how we're going to start getting armed troops on the streets of the UK. And, many more of our personal freedoms might get taken away, and there's going to be more surveillance. And we've heard stories about what's happening in France in terms of they can now shut down any website that they choose, and they can now barge into anybody's house and search it without a warrant and throw anybody in jail without trial if they suspect them of anything that they choose. And I think people are starting to think, my God, this is getting crazy and it's getting a little bit too close for comfort. And people are starting to examine some of the finer detail of what we're told went down in Paris, and they're starting to see that it doesn't add up. They're starting to learn about the use of crisis actors. They're starting to learn about the passport thing. There's all these passport memes that have been going over Facebook about these indestructible passports. It is waking people up. People are saying, yeah, I remember actually there's something on 9/11 about that. Yeah, how can a paper passport survive all this mayhem? Why do they keep finding these passports? Why did they find a Syrian passport at the exact point in time where they wanted to go in and invade Syria, and now they're doing just that? So if there's anything...
Yeah, the time is running out, Mark, and I think you make your point really clear. People are seeing that it's coming really close now, and the time for waking up is absolutely now. What I want to do is I'll most certainly invite you back again, because I think there's so many subjects we need to delve into much more. And you're a brilliant speaker and you have a lot of information to share. So I'll do that. But there is a show after this one, so I need to round it up now, Mark, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much for sharing this. And I think we've now done 2 hours of information on. This is not the right one.
It goes quick, huh?
Goes really quick, yeah. So thank you very much, Mark. This is what we're gonna do next week. Then we'll have a guest from the USA. Joe Atwell is his name, and we'll talk about the book of what he wrote about Caesar's Messiah. Claims that the whole invention of Jesus Christ came from Rome. I have a little bit different understanding about that, but that the historic Jesus never lived. That's to me very certain. So we're gonna have, I think, an interesting discussion there. And in 2 weeks' time from now, on December 10, Judith Berry Baker will be the guest of Pateo Television. She wrote the book Me and Lee about Lee Harvey Oswald. She knew him then when the event with John F. Kennedy occurred, and I also have a little bit different understanding of what really happened on that day, November 22 in the year 1963. So that might
mention Miles Mathis.
Exactly. So that's going to be also interesting. So these are the upcoming episodes of Pateo Television. This was the episode for this day. Thank you very much for watching it. If you liked it, please tell other people about this, because that's the way the truth will spread. Support us in any way you can, but mostly talk about it to your friends and talk about what happened in France. Talk about what's happening in the music industry, and you have a choice. You have a choice to choose to buy music from good artists and not to watch and buy from bad artists. So if you want to learn more about that, go to the website of Mark and you'll find the information there. But we can say no. We can say we will take no shit, and that's exactly what
everything is a choice, man. Everything is a choice, and it's down to us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. Hope you tune in next time, same frequency. Bye for now.
The pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world should be the focus of every person on our planet. The reason it is not is because people are kept distracted by the illusions and deceit propagated by the corporately controlled mainstream media. In recent years, the rise in truly informed, savvy researchers and journalists who have all taken to the air in various capacities has given rise to a new genre of media. We have seen the explosion of truly free and independent media, and thus the need to create an ethical live broadcast network that facilitated these brave and tireless souls became apparent. With a great amount of research and meticulous planning, Conscious Consumer Network was created. CCN is a first-of-its-kind broadcast network that is specifically dedicated to free and independent media with absolutely no government control, corporate sponsorship, or advertising. The live broadcast network runs full-time with an average of 25 shows and live broadcasts a week. The high-definition live stream is free to view and is accessible from any computer terminal with online access, including laptops, tablets, smartphones, and smart TVs. All shows are archived onto YouTube and are freely available to view in order to educate and inform as many as we can without imposing monetary limitations. CCN was successfully launched on the 1st of January 2015 and has gone from strength to strength as we have improved and increased the capacities and functionalities of the network, as well as an ever-rotating and improving lineup of content which is broadcast daily. CCN is blessed to be the home of some of the hardest-hitting, most cutting-edge, truly educational and informative materials. Catch interviews, reviews, and talk shows from the many different and beautiful perspectives from CCN's family of interviewers and broadcasters. Since the 1st of January 2015, we have produced over 800 shows. We have over 2 million YouTube minutes watched every month, and we have an average of 1 million hits a day on CCN's website. CCN is viewed in over 147 different countries and hosts broadcasters from 5 different continents. The time has now come to generate funding to keep CCN on the air for the duration of 2016. The total sum needed to continue broadcasting for 2016 is $60,000. This budget includes the replacement of computer equipment, the acquisition of secure servers, which are most needed as we keep getting hacked, plus the renewal of the broadcast license fee for 2016. This is a fraction of the annual budget used by mainstream media networks producing a similar quantity of content. This is what makes CCN so successful, unique, and accessible, is the ability to run a project of this size and reach on such minimal resources. CCN does not claim ownership over any of the material we produce and broadcast, as we firmly believe that information is the common heritage of all beings, and thus CCN belongs to you, the public, and it is up to you all to keep CCN going. CCN would like to thank those who have contributed to the network in the past with resources, content, information, time, and energy. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.